Please welcome Art von Bodegraven, Managing Principal, von Bodegraven Associates.
I promised that was water. I'm really a little bit flummoxed, and I apologize. I've been thrown off my game. Cindy set me up. Oh, man. We had, first of all, Barry was up here, and it's a two-edged sword, this research and data thing, in that it's always nice to have anecdotal opinions supported by data. Love to hear it. But there's always the horrible danger that in looking at data, we have two fundamental flaws that can creep in. One is that as most of us being North Americans, we were taught in school that there's a right way and a wrong way to do things. And so in taking tests or answering questions, our first inclination is to try to imagine what's the answer supposed to be? And so a lot of that, I think, comes out in surveys. And it explains some of the dichotomies that we observe in survey results and actual behaviors in the field. But those are sharp guys, and they know how to, and guys is a gender-neutral term, by the way, for those of you who are wondering. They filter and I think adjust for all of that. The other danger in dealing with data is that it can uncover facts that are contrary to opinion, and that data is obviously flawed, so I ignore it, and I would encourage you to do the same. I appreciate very much Elemica and the fine people there for inviting me. It's sort of like old home week to come back to Philadelphia and revisit the scene of my most recent arrest, which was 2 years ago, and I'm just about through the probationary period, which is great. This is a terrific venue, first-class event for sure. Actually, I had an ulterior motive, to tell the truth. I really want to work for Elemica, and I've been searching around for job applications. I invested in the first stage of a haircut that seems to be... But we've come to talk a little bit about collaboration, which is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. I will play a little bit off of some of the things that Barry talked to us about. And one of the things that really resonated with me is his emphasis on the people aspect of collaboration. We'll get into that as we go along. I've got, for those of you who are accounting, and there will be some of you out there who do, I've got about 2 hours worth of material here. And you're saying, oh, Lord, consultants, lots of PowerPoints. 2 incomprehensible diagrams. What are we going to do now? And I'm going to read you every one of those slides. And now you're thinking, good Lord, help us. We have an academic among us. No, neither. Guilty on the consulting part. It's a venial sin, though, the academic part, the teaching thing. But I'll try to get through a few key points that I think are make or break in how we approach this issue of collaboration and business relationships. It's an interesting topic. We live in a world full of customers and suppliers, by the way. They make our lives challenging. They make our lives difficult. They make our lives, from a business standpoint, sort of worth living. So what do we do about that? And we have other people in our circle of folks who help us execute as supply chains. We've got consultants. We've got 3PLs. We've got academic advisors. We've got... How do we keep those relationships going? How do we make them useful and mutually beneficial? And are these different from other kinds of relationships? Well, people overuse the marriage analogy, so I'll try to stay away from that, but it's difficult. Sometimes you do slip into it. And then there's the burning issue of what keeps relationships going. It's okay to say, I have a relationship. But let's just tell the truth about something here for a minute. How many of you are directly involved with sales and marketing? Okay. It's nothing to be ashamed of. You can raise your hand. It's all right. But there are a lot of people who latch on to this idea, now that we're all talking about relationships, of saying, oh, yeah, collaboration, relationships, bigger entertainment budget, I can hardly wait. We'll have more dinners, more drinks. We'll invite Robert Mondavi to, never mind. That passion disappears fairly quickly. What do you do to keep it going? Because what's the point if it's not sustainable? If it's not part of the tapestry of how a business survives, prospers, grows, gains identity and share of mind in its market. And the Elemica people are going to cringe a little bit now, but it's more than just sharing data. And it's more than schmoozing at the conference and buying dinner and drinks and practicing knee walking after a round of golf. The relationships, which are the foundation for collaboration, are much, much more than that. Now, some very smart people, I shamelessly steal from people, as you can see, have some interesting things to say about relationships and collaboration. My favorite is Ambrose Bierce, the old gringo. A person you know well enough, an acquaintance is a person whom you know well enough to borrow money from, but not well enough to lend to. I have a brother who's an acquaintance now, but that's another story. We'll save that. And a sort of a local legend with an international reputation, who sadly is no longer with us, but Andrew Wyeth said, it's not important what to put in, it's important what to leave out in building relationships. How does this translate to the world of supply chain management? Well, beyond artists and writers and philosophers and so forth, we have real people doing real work in our universe of supply chain management who are talking about collaboration and therefore relationships. Ann Drake, for those of you who know Ann, she's the CEO of DSC, the 3PL, one of the toughest business people I have ever dealt with, and a terrific person. Very, very high energy, very determined. When Ann says we are now in a new age of collaboration, I take notice, because she is about the last person I would expect would get on the bus, and there she is sitting next to the driver already. Derek Leathers at Werner Transportation, who's a bit of a maverick in his industry, is always saying something fairly outrageous, but at a time when capacity is tight, pardon me while I remove this and don't do any distracting odd sounds as I perambulate up here. Derek has said, we're going to reserve capacity for the customers who treated us right when things weren't so good. Wow. You're going to turn away money just because they're strangers? Yep. We're going to save the capacity for the people that we have long-term collaborative relationships with. And you're not going to charge them an arm and a leg just because you're the only one with capacity? No. We collaborate in these relationships. We each treat one another right. So, Steve Jobs, who was not known to be a collaborative person, talks about innovation, leaders and followers. And I don't know if this is a Russian proverb or a Ukrainian proverb, but going back to the world of, even though we're saying collaboration is about more than data sharing, to the blind, all events are sudden. Well, with data and visibility, we don't have to be as blind as we used to be as we execute within the structure of collaborative relationships. I'm going to skip over some of this in the interest of time and of allowing a little bit of time for questions, but if you look at this and want to think about it, that's fine. In a world of relationships, again, this foundation piece for collaboration, we've got some interesting models in history. In France, les États généraux, the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners. The English Parliament mirrors that societal division with the, we now know why it's called the House of Lords, because it's the Lords temporal and the Lords spiritual, and then the common folk were represented in the other house. And of course, then comes a fourth estate, the press. And in somewhat more disruptive times, a century or two ago, a fifth estate of anarchists was recognized as well. And we sort of mirror that sort of division in the world of supply chain management as well, in which academia have collectively deemed themselves to be the Lord's spiritual, the clergy. Consultants, of course, and software developers think that they're the nobility of the profession. My wife reminds me frequently that that is not at all true. And then, of course, we've got regular folk, the practitioners, the commoners, the people who really make things happen. The fourth, there is a trade press. Some of it is not as independent as other press avenues might be, but that's another challenge. And the state of anarchy, of course, is inherent in any committee that's formed, whether it's in a collaborative enterprise or within one organization. But in the supply chain, as you know, we've just got this flood, this tidal wave of potential relationships that we somehow need to manage or build or maintain or keep track of or enable or solve problems with or. And people at conferences, glib folks standing on a platform, like to talk about the supply chain. Come on. Ain't no such thing. We have multiple supply chains. There's not a supply chain, even in one company. You know, depending on what kind of materials, products, components you're dealing with, your inbound supply chain starts to have some variability in it. And you have different ways that you've got to deal with elements in that inbound chain. And then as you look at your customer base, who might operate in different channels or have different protocols, or ad infinitum, you've got multiple outbound channels as well. We are fond these days, of course, of talking about omni-channel in the world of retail. And that's another, come on, get real term. What is called omni-channel really reflects that there are some slightly differing technology-based points of entry into a direct channel. So it doesn't make any difference whether it comes through on your iPad or your smartphone or something else that's mobile. It all is going into a direct distribution channel, and so on and so on. But within all of this, we've got all of these relationships to figure out how to manage. Is it too complicated? Yes, it is too complicated. And therein lies part of the beauty of our really wonderful profession, is that it is complicated, and that's what makes it fun and challenging, and more than just a place where you go and clock in every day and hope that in 25 years you get your gold watch. Well, that world is gone forever, but at any rate, yeah, it is complicating and challenging and rewarding. And it is part of a universe in which we keep hearing people use the mantra of supply chains compete against supply chains. Companies don't compete against companies. And that's essentially true. You may doubt it as you're wrestling with a particularly tough supplier or a particularly tough customer, but it's a supply chain competing against a supply chain. So let's think about, if we rewind the tape, oops, I think I just dated myself technology-wise. If we go to Hulu Plus and look for last season's episodes, we can look at two supply chains, end-to-end supply chains in the world of consumer electronics. And as a consumer, I loved Circuit City. But as you looked at Circuit City's supply chain against Best Buy's, which is having challenges of its own, by the way, there was no question as to who was going to live and who was going to die. It's just that Circuit City died a little sooner than some of us thought they might. If you look at Lowe's and Home Depot, those are supply chains competing against supply chains. You might make an argument, too, that Sam's Club and Costco have competing supply chains. Although, to be fair, they are going after different market segments as well, which complicates things, too. So why do we collaborate? Well, there's a new game of business going on. We've got the phenomenon of a global market source, et cetera, to deal with. We are discovering that emotional intelligence is as important as, perhaps more important, than raw Stanford Binet IQ. Supply chains are shifting in terms of channel distribution, in terms of moving sourcing, and we could do a couple of hours on reshoring, nearshoring, et cetera, but at the end of the game, we've all got a bottom line to deal with somehow or another, and I will part company a little bit with Barry right here. He talked a lot about reducing inventories, and that's cool. But the real nature of what we're about as we collaborate in our business relationships with our suppliers and our customers is not cutting inventory, it's right-sizing inventory. And sometimes that means having more inventory. Whoa. People are crass, holding the phone to their pacemaker, getting it checked out right now when you talk about adding inventory. But the savings in inventory, the investment in finished product, the carrying cost of that inventory is oftentimes, in a big company, a big number, and that gets everybody's attention. Wow, $10 million. Oh, gosh, what I could do with that. You'd be surprised at how fast it goes. Tip of the iceberg, almost a rounding error. Because when we collaborate, and when our own house is in order and we have internal collaboration and alignment, we find out that what goes on in supply chain management is driving the ROA, ROI, ROE of a business enterprise. And when we are facilitating based on aligned expectations for marketplace demands and reliability of supply sources, we are driving asset deployment, asset investment decisions at the highest level of the corporation. At that point, who cares about the inventory? Yeah. It's okay. I still pick up pennies off the sidewalk. It's all right if I don't have to go out of my way. But sometimes I run into a lamppost because I thought I saw a $5 bill over there. So we have bigger fish to fry than cutting inventories. But, don't throw it away. It's perfectly good money. But we collaborate for all those good reasons. Now, we talk a lot, too, about partnerships in this world of relationships and collaboration. And that's another word that is horrendously overused. It's just, come on, how many partnerships can you have? And what does it mean? Well, those of you who watched the series, the HBO series Big Love, anybody Big Love fans out here? I'm not asking for religious affiliation now, but you know that there is a practical limitation to the number of deep and intimate relationships that any human being can manage simultaneously. Perhaps it is greater than one. I make no value judgments in that, but it is not 22. That just is not working out. So how do we deal with a new age of collaboration and partnership and whatever new word we decide to add to that? Well, we've got issues. Sometimes we like to throw rocks at Walmart because they're tough, they're demanding. and they will kill you if you do them wrong. But the expectations are very clear. It's not mysterious. So once you understand, they're very reliable to do business with. It's just, if you one false step and they leave you for dead. That's new game, new rules. But in really serious and solid collaborative relationships, the ones that are make or break for our businesses, we've got high trust, high communication. We have perhaps not totally shared values, but reasonably compatible values. We have no secrets financially or even product development-wise. And we live in a world of mutual benefit. Whether it's how do we carve up the savings, who gets what percentage, or how do we both benefit from being able to capture a greater share of market, or how do you as a supplier benefit if I keep you as a primary supplier and I build my business by 25% and you get to supply all that 25% in addition to what you're doing now. Isn't that more important than the $23 that came from the latest process improvement? Maybe, maybe not. To be determined. But it's all kind of fair game. Barry used the example earlier of collaborative development, and I hate to be one of these guys who gets up and says, "Well, when I was a boy, by golly, I don't want to do the father time card on you here, but well over 25 years ago, a large food manufacturer entered into agreements with a single supplier in each of its major product component categories, including packaging, and struck deals. It was exclusive supply relationships, unheard of, risky, frightening, petrifying almost. And boy, it worked. And it didn't require a 5-year contract at the end of which time, the world might come to an end or you might sign up again, whatever. But it was an ongoing, rolling, sustainable relationship. Were there safeguards in place, risk mitigations to ensure process and business continuity? Sure, of course. It's part of the arrangement. Were there mutual anticipatory problem-solving teams working on product development, packaging development, design for manufacturability? Amazing. Immense savings, both ends of the thing. Incredible. So, the elements of collaboration are these, and I'll go really fast to try to wrap this up. Connect first. Barry's right. This is about people. But it's not just about people doing their jobs. That's important. It's about people knowing their counterparts as people and having an authentic connection with those counterparts. Once you establish that, then you can begin to talk seriously and with mutual confidence about what you might do together. You need to understand who it is you're talking to, whether it's a customer or supplier. What's the environment they live in? What's the competitive environment? What are the imperatives that are driving their behaviors? Trust cannot be declared. Has to be earned. Somebody's got to take the first step because trust is an earned attribute. Nobody's born, here, trust me. I'm ready. It says right here, big T, trust. Sharing information gives you power. Giving a bit of yourself away makes you stronger. It's a little frightening, isn't it? And then, of course, managing yourself, having your own game in play is important. The dimensions of trust are important. This trust thing is terribly, terribly important, and there are several levels of it. Because you can have people who are sincere as anything and can't walk and chew gum at the same time. Well, you can trust them to mean well, but can you trust them to execute? Maybe not. Are they able? So you got to understand where the boundaries to your trust lie in these collaborative relationships. And of course, we all have different styles about how we evaluate what constitutes trustworthiness. We have the show me. We've got the what else you got school. And then we've got the whatever, dude, it'll all work out. So we have different approaches to evaluating trust in our partners. But we need ways to sort it all out, to the point that was made earlier. And we would all be dead if we didn't have the Johari window to help us categorize things, to understand where to put our efforts: high impact, low impact, simple, complex, business critical, full of risk and interruption potentials, non-critical. Face it, we might be spending a fortune every year on office supplies. Does it really matter outside of price whether you go to Staples or wherever else? Does it really matter if they run out of big pens? Crying out loud, you can go to Walgreens and get pens to get you through the day. Come on. So you're not going to invest a ton in that kind of relationship. But if you are, let's say a large army, for example. Better yet, we'll make it a large air force in an unnamed country. You'd be really close to the people at Lockheed Martin. You'd be working on stuff together as you define specifications, wish lists, whatever capabilities, and they begin to imagine what warfighters will require in the future in terms of capacity and capability, and simultaneously we come together with a design for something that costs about $500 million. That's the quantity discount if you buy two, and so on and so forth. So you get all kinds of things, and we won't go through all of these examples, but these basic rules apply to suppliers, to customers, to service providers, but importantly, start with getting your own house in order. Get internally aligned on what this is about. You have internal customers. Oh, yeah. And they need to know that they can trust you, that your word is good, and you need to know that their word is good, and you could trust them. And you've got to be aligned, not on last century business structures in which we all had our own marching orders, even when they were, our objectives were directly in opposition to one another. You know, one place here is supposed to make all you can, run the factory 24/7. And the poor warehouse manager over here is trying to find a place to put it all, and will get killed for having too much inventory. And meanwhile, the salespeople are out there going, well, we think there's a big order coming up here, maybe next quarter. We got to get away from that old school model into the integrated, holistic, synchronized, end-to-end supply chain model, and then build trust and competence within all of that. So wrapping up, these relationships that are the foundation for collaboration are absolutely priceless. They do take a ton of hard work. Are there places where an arm's length transactional relationship still works? Yeah. Do you want to build a business around it? Probably not in this new century. And we can go on from there. The point that I wanted to really wrap on is on the people point. We cannot take the collaborative relationship for granted. And where we are really is that, for those of you from Ohio, Harvey Firestone was kind of a famous guy. And he and Henry Ford were really good friends. I mean, they were BFFs before they were BFFs. You know, and they would go on vacations together. They'd go camping. They'd be sitting around cooking weenies over the fire and taking selfies of themselves and sending them around. Bought up half of Florida. And Ford vehicles and Firestone tires were, those things went together. And then there was a problem. Some explorers were running off the road, and some people died, and it was very tragic. And nobody seemed to recognize that Firestone had been bought by Bridgestone. And Harvey was dead a long time, and Henry was dead a long time. And the chairman of Bridgestone was of the opinion that perhaps there was a flaw in the vehicle design and possibly Americans weren't very good drivers either. Bam! That collaborative relationship was done, finished that quickly. So these are fragile, vulnerable things, these collaborative relationships. They take work to build, they take work to maintain, and you can't take anything for granted. Happily, when we get to how do we handle all this complexity and all of these relationships we got to deal with, once we get past the idea we've got to have good, capable people, we now get into the reality that, yes, we do need data. We do need alignment on the reliability and quality of that information. And to the extent that we are being delivered more tools and more technology that give us a fuller picture of what's going on, really allows us to cover more ground in collaborative relationships than we could even dream of 10 or 15 years ago. So that's a huge step in the right direction. I don't know if we've got time for questions, or are you just going to drag me off here, Shauna? Man, I must have scared him good. Well, if there are no questions, I will be around for the rest of the day and into the evening, and I've really enjoyed talking with all of you so far. Obviously, this is a subject that's near and dear to my heart, but we're at a point now at which we're ready to go into our first breakout session, right? And they promised that, that a slide would come up telling us where to go.
Reveal 2014 presents breakout session. Please choose the track from your